Hey, thanks for clicking on my video. Seb Heslow here, and today we're gonna establish once and for all what is the best GPU for mining Ergo, at least when it comes to what's the best bang for the buck, budget-wise. So I have made a very comprehensive spreadsheet here, as you can see on the screen. So this will be another one of my spreadsheet series. I already made one of these for both Ravencoin and for Ethereum mining as well. But so as you can see here, I've listed 40 different GPUs. And we're gonna compare them today when it comes to mining Ergo and price point and power efficiency and all that. But just before we get started, this spreadsheet, I'll put a link to it in the description so you can go check it out if you want. And also, I'm gonna assume some things like the price you're able to get these at, and I'm sure you are gonna disagree because these are the prices that I would be able to get these for in my country, and that is going to be different because you're gonna be in a different country to me. So what you can do is you can click the link to this spreadsheet and you can make a copy of this spreadsheet, and then you'll be able to edit in the GPU prices that are relevant for you. So just know that. And just before we get started, this spreadsheet also has a little disclaimers tab here. I'm just gonna say, if you're looking to make some sort of snarky comment or something like that, then just pause the video and read these and see if that doesn't clear things up for you. All right, so let's get into actually comparing some GPUs, shall we? So let's look at this spreadsheet here. What we've got is all our GPUs in this list here, and we got the hash rate that they get on Ergo, so mining Ergo. We've also got a column for how much Ergo that would yield from one card in 24 hours. And we have the power drawn by the GPU at that hash rate. I've also listed the TDP for the cards, which is the sort of listed power draw for these. That will become relevant a bit later. And then we have this. So income per 1 gigahash a second per day. So what that means is, if you were to make a mining farm of, for example, 1650s, right? And that farm would get up to 1 gigahash a second. How much would that farm profit you per day? And the reason we're listing this is because of the different power draws. These GPUs are differently, they're different efficiency-wise, right? So all else different, if you have enough of these to have the same hash rate, which ones are the most profitable due to drawing the least amount of energy to reach 1 gigahash a second? I hope that makes sense. So what we can do is we can just sort this spreadsheet by this column, and what we can see is that it's actually a GTX 1080 that is the it's actually the worst. It draws the most power for the hash rate it's getting. So let me just sort it backwards, and here we can see that the most power efficient GPU for mining Ergo is actually a 3060 Ti, which would net you, which would, your profit, taking electricity cost into account, would be $15.14. And that is assuming an electricity cost of 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So I hope that makes sense. I'm gonna sort it by order instead. And then let's jump to here. So this is just a list of how many kilowatt hours per day does one of these cards pull. And then finally here, I've listed the current price point that I'm able to buy these cards at. And as I said already, I'm sure this will be different for you. But so if you just have a little quick look here, we can see that, of course, the more money you spend, the higher the hash rate you're gonna get. But as we saw before, when we sorted by income per 1 gigahash, the most efficient card isn't necessarily the cheapest or the most expensive either, because it's a 3060 Ti. But so there's more to it than just hash rate and cost and power efficiency, right? So what I wanted to look at was okay, let's say we're getting into mining Ergo, right? What would be the cheapest way to build a 1 gigahash mining farm for Ergo? And so that is what this next section is here, which I've called 1 gigahash rig build. So let's have a closer look at this. So the first column here is just how many GPUs would you need of this kind to reach 1 gigahash a second. So for a GTX 1650, because they get around 33 megahash mining Ergo, right? You would need 30 of them to reach 1 gigahash. But of course, since you can't just put 30 GPUs into one rig, that means you need to split these up into multiple rigs. And so what I've done in this spreadsheet here is I've assumed a rig of like maximum 8 cards per rig. Now, of course, there are some motherboards that can fit up to 13 GPUs, and you maybe only have access to motherboards that can fit 6 GPUs on that motherboard. But I've assumed sort of a middle of the road average to be 8 GPUs per rig. So with 30 GPUs for a 1650, that means you would need 4 rigs. And the price for just the GPUs would be $6,450. And the power they would draw would be 3,563 watts. Okay? So then we look here and we can see, okay, what would all of these rigs cost to build? Which I've got here. So, you know, the rig costs more than just the GPUs. You also have to buy the motherboard, SSD, and so on. And so these are the numbers that I've assumed for building a rig. So I've put $300 for the base rig, which I'm counting is the motherboard, the CPU, the RAM, the SSD, and any sort of like little other things like a mining frame or some sort of way of mounting your GPUs, and you know, little on-off switches and stuff. I've put all of that down as $300. And then I've said you also need $7 per GPU for a riser, as well as you need the power supplies. And what I've done is, because the power supplies differ depending on like the wattage pulled by the GPUs, what I've just said is a power supply roughly costs about 20 cents per watt. So to give a concrete example of that is a 1000 watt power supply would cost around $200. So that is how I've calculated that. So looking at that now, if we want to build a 1 gigahash a second mining farm using 1650s, the total price of all of the rigs would be $8,572.50. So that's including the 30 GPUs as well as the 4 rigs that you need to build, including risers and power supplies. So what we can do now, and this is where it gets really interesting, is what if we sort this by cheapest to most expensive? So now we can see the cheapest way to build a 1 gigahash ERGO mining farm would be an RX 570 mining farm, basically. So you would need 15 RX 570 because they get around 68 megahash on ERGO. And 15 GPUs means you can fit that in a total of 2 rigs, which that's good. That's you know, a bit like condensed, right? And the total price of the GPUs, because like to me, whenever I look on like used 570s, they go for around $200. You will probably disagree, and then you can go in and edit the spreadsheet and add your price, but that is what I'm able to get these for. And so that means to build a 1 gigahash ERGO mining farm using 570s, the total cost would be $4,342.50. That is pretty good for 1 gigahash, if you ask me. That is almost mind-blowing how cheap you can get up to 1 gigahash on ERGO using 570s. Now, of course, you know, the ERGO algorithm is different to Ethereum, which is, I mean, what we've seen already. All these cards get at least like double the hash rate they do on Ethereum. But still, 1 gigahash, just about $4,000. That is pretty cool. But you know, you don't just pay for, you know, the rigs once and then you're done. You also have to pay for electricity cost. So what if we try to factor in the power draw of these rigs as well? So that is what we get here in this next column, which is cost to run per year. So that is basically just how much like electricity would these rigs draw per year, and then times that by the electrical cost that you've added up here. So for this 570 rig, it cost about $1,600 to run per year. Now we can put that in comparison to the RTX 3060 Ti rig, which would just cost $815 roughly to run per year. That is basically half the cost to run per year. And I'm thinking you don't just buy a rig to run it for a few months. Like if you were to like buy and build out a 1 gigahash ERGO mining farm, you're probably doing that to run it for at least 4 years. So that is where this column comes in, which is the total cost after 4 years of mining on it. So this includes the total price of building the rigs plus the 4 years of electricity, like the price of 4 years of electricity. So what we can do then is if we sort this by cheapest to most expensive, we can see that now things changed up a little bit. Again, the RTX 3060 is back on top, because as we saw earlier, it is the most power efficient card to run on ERGO, profits wise. It seems, at least to the at least according to all of the numbers that I could find for hash rate and power consumption. And so what that means is that this rig, or yeah, it's because it will just be one rig, because all you need is 6 cards which would fit into one rig. And so that is, after 4 years you will have spent less than $10,000 including electricity cost on your 1 gigahash a second ERGO mining rig farm, whatever. But what is always fun to do in these situations too is, what's the worst? What's at the bottom here? So let's scroll all the way down. And here we can see right at the bottom we have some sort of like fairly newer AMD cards with the, well, with the 6900 XT definitely, and I guess the 5500 XT. And as you can see, the total cost after 4 years building a 1 gigahash a second mining farm with those would be, well, with the 5500 XT would be almost $22,000. So more than double what you would pay building a 1 gigahash mining farm using 3060 Ti's, which that's definitely something. And then another thing here is the GTX 1650 Super actually ends up quite far down here as well, or I mean very far down. And I guess that is just because of both the initial cost of building the rig is pretty high, but also the power draw is very high as well. Not quite as high as the 1550, the 5500 XT one, but it's up there. So these are all things to take into consideration, and you know, it's interesting because, you know, it might be the case that for you electricity is very expensive, and then what you can do is of course go in here, change this to your electrical cost and see how these things change. Or maybe the fact is that you have close to free electricity where you live, and then of course it's just the rig price that is more relevant to you, and you wouldn't really need to sort by this total cost after 4 years. But so then let's look at something else, which is the total yield. So what would 1 gigahash a second like give you after 4 years? And that is, it would give you around just above 5,000 ERGO. And the reason why this is different is because, you know, like 6 3060 Ti's won't get you exactly 1 gigahash. It might get you a little bit more, and because they all will get a little bit more, but differently, because these are all going to be what they need roughly, like how many roughly they need, right? You can see here I'm just rounding it, so that means they will yield a little bit different, but they're all going to yield roughly the same. And so then what I've put is, what if you sold that whole yield at a price of $33 per ERGO, like per coin, which is a price that I believe is the all-time high of ERGO or close to it. I expected because I thought it was a nice number, and it's a realistic number for what ERGO could hit again. Again, nothing in this video is financial advice by any stretch of the imagination, as you saw in the disclaimer earlier. But as you can see, these rigs are all going to yield you, or profit you rather, I should say. Well, they will net you, I think, is the correct term, around $175,000, something like that. Now that is not taking the total cost into account. So if you were to do this minus the total cost, you can see how things differ a bit. So this one, you'd end up with around $152,000, while this one would get you around $162,000. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. I would really urge you to like go and visit the link for this spreadsheet and sort it by different things and just see how these are relevant to you. So now, there was one more thing that I wanted to do with this, which is, let's just say instead of wanting to build a 1 gigahash mining farm, let's say you have a fixed budget. What would be the max amount of hash rate you could get for that budget? So let's start with a budget of $3,000, which we can see here. So what if you want to build a $3,000 rig? And let's just sort the GPUs by order again. So if you have $3,000 to spend on a rig, that means you could build that you could get 9 1650s, and keep in mind this is also taking rig costs into account. So this is not just you have $3,000 to spend on GPUs. This is $3,000 you have to spend total. So taking like the whole rig or multiple rigs into account, you could build a 9 GPU mining farm with GTX 1650. So that would be one rig with 8 cards and one rig with 1 card, I guess. And your total hash rate would be 297 megahash a second. The cost of the GPUs would be just below $2,000, and the total cost for like the whole rig or rigs would be 2,826. So these are all going to be fairly close to the $3,000 mark, because the way I've done the math is it needs to get as close as possible to $3,000 without going over by more than I think $50 or $100. So what we can also see here is that the amount of GPUs that you can afford varies like a lot. So if you got your eye on a 3090, for example, you can only get one for the $3,000 just because of how expensive that GPU is. And a very good example of how this affects you is buying an RTX 3080. You could only buy one because the price of one plus the rig leaves you at about $1,917, which means you have almost $1,100 left over. But because the 3080s are so expensive, you can't afford more than one anyway if your budget is $3,000. Sorry. And so let's now look at what is the most hash rate you could get for $3,000. So let me just sort this now by hash rate. And again, we can see the RX 570 ends up on top, because that will give you a hash rate of 680 megahash per second if you've got $3,000 to spend on an ERGO mining farm. That is so much, and it is also so much more than just what the second place in this list. Like, it is more than 100 megahash more than the RX 470, which would only give you 558 megahash a second. And then what's interesting is in third place you got the 1050 Ti, which would give you just below 500 megahash. And as you can see, that's filling up 2 whole rigs. So like 2 rigs of 8 cards, right? I don't know, I just find these kinds of numbers fascinating, and especially if you look here, like if we go all the way down, what we see is like it's actually all of the expensive cards end up down here, because you can't they're not, because they're so expensive. Each jump up in hash rate is so expensive, if that makes sense. Like if you want to if you have one 3080, you need to spend another like $1,500 to go from one 3080 to 2 3080s, and then you blow your budget of $3,000, because 2 3080s would be $3,000, and now you have no money left over for motherboards, risers, the CPU, a rig. So let's keep going. I also made 3 other categories here, which is a $2,000 rig, a $1,000 rig, and a $500 rig. So let's look here, and we can see that not much changes here really. Let me just sort by hash rate again. There we go. And we can see it jumped around a little bit. But what is most important to look at here, in my opinion, is, well, of course, we can see still on top is the 570 and the 470. But if we look down here, sorry, I jumped around a little bit. We have some non-starters. If you're eyeing a 3090 or a 3080 Ti, you cannot afford to build a mining rig with even one of those if your budget is $2,000. Just because these cards are so expensive that you won't have any money left over for the rest of the rig. But what I'm also seeing is the sort of like not absolute top but almost top cards actually moved around a little bit. So our 1050 Ti is not as high anymore, which that's interesting. And that would be because that still needs 2 full rigs, while these other top ones now are just maxing out like the potential of 1 rig. So that's interesting. But let's jump ahead and get to a $1,000 rig. So let's sort this, and now we can see the 1050 Ti jumps back up into 3rd place again. But as we can see here too, a $1,000 rig will give you, there's like, so there are still 7 alternatives for getting over 100 mega hash for a budget of $1,000 for your like ERGO mining farm. Pretty good. Like, that is pretty good. So what we can see here is it's kind of, we've established now the RX 570 and 470 are just fantastic at ERGO, it seems. And we have the 1050 Ti up at 3rd spot again. And if you're wondering why that keeps popping up so high, it's because they are so cheap. And then we got the 1070 actually, and we got the 1066 gig, and again we got the 3060. I feel like whatever video I'm making, like comparing GPUs, the 3060 always ends up so close to the top. It did in my Ravencoin video, and it did in my Ethereum video as well. Now granted, in the Ethereum, this is it would only place so high if you could get the max 50 mega hash through that like hash rate hack that you can do on the version 1 of those. But let's move forward and look at the final budget here, which is if you have $500 to build a rig, you only really have one option, which is a 1050 Ti. That is the only rig you can build if your budget is $500, because you can just about afford 1 GPU and 1 rig, and that will put you at a total of $475. But so, before we wrap this up, I just want to sort of look back at this a little bit and summarize. So, first of all, let's look at the 1 gigahash rig. And let's sort again by total cost after 4 years, which you want this to be as low as possible. So again, you have some of the heavy hitters here. The 3060 Ti, the 3070, and the 3060, which 3060 always on top somehow. Well, not exactly on top, but it always in like the top 5. And yeah, it's just interesting to see. Also, we still have the 570 and 470 here. And of course, this is also taking like power efficiency into account. And then if we look at the highest budget I've set here, which is $3,000, and we sort by hash rate, because then it becomes what's the highest hash rate I can get for my budget, right? So then we want to sort this backwards, and there we go, 570, 470, and we see some of the less power efficient cards, like the GTX 1070, since this doesn't take power efficiency into account. But I think I'm gonna leave it at this, guys. Please, if this was helpful to you, then give the video one of these. I'd really appreciate that. And what you gotta do now is go click on one of those videos on the screen, because this video is over. You can also click the picture of my face to subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. But yeah, go click on that next video, and I'll see you there. Goodbye. Bye-bye.